Thank you, Jill, and thanks everybody for attending today. I hope the information is helpful for you. We wanted to talk a little bit about today about the whole account hacking situation. I don't think the title of the webinar is going to shock anybody. I think if you've been using the internet for any amount of time and have had some kind of account, like an email account or a social media account or anything, chances are you've got that dreaded email sort of telling you that something has been compromised or giving you an alert that something isn't as it should. And so I'm sure many people are sort of sympathetic to the things we're talking about today. Anyway, as we go today, if there are any questions that people have about the content or anything that I didn't bring up, please feel free to use the chat window, put in any questions you like, and we will make sure to address it. So anyway, let me get started. So just a brief intro, just to give you a little context of where we stand today when it comes to account hacks and credential loss, credential abuse, and things like that. Americans lose 15 billion annually due to identity theft. I mean, there are many industries in the United States that don't generate $15 billion, and we're losing that much simply due to identity theft-based crimes. Now, that's identity theft. That's not talking about all of the other type of crimes that arise from hackers on the web. 1.2 million Microsoft accounts were compromised in January of 2021 alone. So in less than a year ago, 1.2 million Microsoft accounts compromised in just 1 month. I don't know how many millions of Microsoft accounts there are quite a few. But even if this is only a small percentage of those, it just goes to show the volume of the situation. Norton predicts that by 2023, cybercriminals will have stolen another 33 billion records. I don't have a clarification on what quote-unquote records are, but essentially private information, sensitive information is circulating on the dark web. And this is just an asset, just like it's an asset for you and your business. This information is also an asset for cybercriminals to either sell or exploit in a follow-up attack or something like that. In 2019, third-party app developers exposed 540 million user records. So what's a third-party app developer? Essentially, when you're a developer for, say, the Apple iTunes store or maybe the Android store or something like that, you're putting these apps out on the web that have some testing, but obviously can have flaws. And if you're not using the right apps, there's a good chance that the flaws in these applications will lead to a data breach. In 2018, 2.5 billion accounts were hacked, or 158 every second. So I guess over the course of this webinar, let's say it goes 45 minutes or so, that's got to be tens of thousands of accounts that are hacked in just that amount of time. That would be in 2018. I would imagine, if anything, that number has probably gone up since then as more account abuses occurred. So for today's agenda, I want to talk about a bunch of things. First, we want to talk just in general about the factors that have made account compromises worse. And the reason we want to talk about this is you can't really stop the problem until you understand why it exists, right? And we can't solve the problem for our organizations or in our IT departments if we don't understand where we're being attacked and where these things are coming from. I think a lot of people track maybe some of the sexy technology or the things they hear about buzzwise in the news, and they look to implement these things. But the reality is you have to understand where the risk factors are and how they impact you directly. So we'll talk about it in two ways. One is factors you have some control over. So I say some because nothing is 100%. There are a lot of things out here that we could be doing better. Things that if we adjusted on, we would have fewer account hacks. But then there's also factors that you have less control over. We're all kind of swimming with the sharks right now when it comes to working on the web. And a lot of bad things happen that we simply can't control. We can only sort of react to it. But it's important that we know it exists, right? Just because we can't stop the shark from existing in the ocean doesn't mean we can't be knowledgeable about its existence. We're going to talk about some steps you can take to protect the information in your accounts. We'll talk about some technology tools that can significantly reduce risks. So the things, sort of the bread and butter pieces that I think will really help you out. And then, of course, maybe most importantly, the Q&A, where we'll go over any thoughts that you guys have. So what's contributing to account compromises these days? The number one thing is poor password management. So I can talk about any number of situations where people within organizations are using either weak passwords, maybe just a couple words that they know that are familiar to them, or somebody's name or something like that, or they are reusing those passwords at every site. So they have their Facebook account, their Gmail account, they've got Amazon or whatever they're using, and everybody's using the same email address, the same username, and the same password, and they do it because it's easy. And of course, it's easy for you to remember one password, but it's also easy once that password is compromised from any number of directions that I'm going to talk about, to then take this information and exploit it over all those websites. If I'm a bad guy and I get into your Amazon account by cracking your password, I'm probably not going to stop there. I'm probably going to look at other common accounts you might have to see where I can extract further value. Everybody needs to do the very basics when it comes to password management. We'll get into it in a little while, but have some kind of complicated password with letters, numbers, and symbols. Some complexity in that, can't be 3 characters long. It should refresh every so often if it's not, if you're not using multi-factor authentication. You shouldn't be reusing them over and over again, and even use a password manager. So we'll talk about it more. The other thing is poor vulnerability management, and this can happen in any number of places. So if I've got let's say I've got the best password and multi-factor authentication in place, and yet the device I'm using to log in is poorly managed. It's an old device. Maybe it hasn't gotten patched in a while. Maybe it's lacking the endpoint protection that it should have, whatever. There are other ways my credentials could get compromised. Maybe there's a keylogger that's pulling that information from my computer, or I didn't run a patch that allowed a hacker to ultimately remove a hash from a password and extract the encrypted data. If you're not managing the devices you're using properly, someone's going to find those loopholes and then take advantage of it, not to go after the device necessarily, but to go after the accounts and the information in it. At the end of the day, one thing we all have to realize when we operate on the web is that people don't really care about the devices themselves. I think a lot of people worry, I spent $1,000 on this laptop or something like that. The bad guys don't really care about the laptop. They care about what you're doing on the laptop and how that can be exploited. So just keep that in mind. Device negligence and carelessness. So, we don't patch them, we don't update them. A device is working for 10 years, and so we don't touch it, just sort of bury our heads in the sand on it because things are functional. Sometimes we leave things sitting around, or we leave a device open in a public spot where someone can see what we're doing, or can just access our information to an already logged in service. We have to have some mindfulness in terms of how we actually are using our devices if we want to have some success in protecting our data behind it. A lack of awareness. Many people who are using their computer just simply aren't aware of the threats that are out there. They don't have at their company any kind of security awareness training. They haven't gotten an education on what phishing threats are, or what a patch is and why it's important to do, or something like that. And as a result, if you're not really if you're not really told why these things you're doing are wrong, you're just going to keep doing them. And we can't have sort of a set it and forget it attitude towards our staff. People need to be aware of the threats out there and what they can do about it, because they're a part of the solution. There's also the install it now, secure it later attitude. I wrote a blog last month. You can check it out on our website. October was Cybersecurity Month, and there was a different theme for every week. And one of the themes was building security into decision-making processes. A lot of organizations decide they want to get this new ERP or this new database or some other system or new email or whatever, or new devices. And they think about the promise of these things and what they can do and how much better things are going to be, how fast something might be, or how much more productive they'll be. But what they don't think about is that their increased leverage of needing these devices, as well as how now we're creating this really valuable information store, a bank, if you will, of all this data that could be exploited and taken advantage of. really security needs to be a part of our process. So when we're going out there and we're deciding to make big changes to our business or implementing something new, one of the questions has to be, how does this impact our security and what should we change about it? A lot of organizations just simply don't do that. What else is contributing that we have less control over? So I really do want to talk about things that, as individuals, these things are just sort of happening in the background. We can react to them, but it's going to be very difficult for us to have a direct impact on them. So the first thing is that phishing websites and emails are just way, way up. I believe I didn't pull the statistic, but there's some kind of stat that a certain percentage of domain names that are bought, if you go to like a GoDaddy or something like that and you want, something.com, that a not insignificant portion of those new domains being purchased are used simply to do phishing exercises or create phishing websites. And GoDaddy is just selling domains. They don't necessarily know who's buying this domain. They're just providing it to them. All the tools are there to commit these crimes, and it's kind of a free sort of area to do it. I mean, I couldn't set up on, we're here in Colombia. I couldn't set up on I-95 a drug cartel because the cops would catch up to me. They would see all this stuff happening. But if I wanted to establish, a phishing organization, I could set up in the middle of the web, and using a few proper tools, I could be completely, maybe not completely, but it can make it very difficult to be found. So we can't really control that. We just have to be aware that this stuff exists. Many websites are improperly managed. You go to a website, you decide, I'm going to use I'm listening to Ben, I'm going to do the complicated password, I'm going to do MFA, I'm using a really strong secured device, I got this endpoint detection stuff that's really great and it's really working well, and blah, 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 you're doing everything. And the website you're using is poorly managed. They don't do things properly. They don't use the right encryption keys. Perhaps they didn't code their site right, and now there is a vulnerability in terms of how the way the site is written, and now there's a vulnerability there. I'm not going to tell somebody, don't go to Amazon.com, don't go to Target.com or Walmart or some of these websites. But if those sites have a flaw in them, we can't help that. And it could be that our credit card information or our password is stolen just because of somebody else's negligence. Just keep that in mind. And this is part of the reason why I mentioned before, password management is really important, because if one website mismanages a password you gave to them, we don't want it spilling over to those other websites. There's also product failure. So, when a lot of products are released, especially technology products, and they're very functional, they do a great job, they get everything, they achieve the functional purpose that you set out for them. But then you hear a month or two later that there's this critical flaw that's found on this device, and because of it, it's being exploited in the wild and people are stealing information. Well, as far as you're concerned as an individual, you did all the right things. You bought a good device, you've been maintaining it, etc. It's just there was a flaw in it fundamentally that you couldn't have known about. We kind of have to assume that all of our devices have some kind of flaw or failure built into them, and we shouldn't trust necessarily anything to be 100% secure, because even when we're doing our best out there, are still unknown flaws and unknown vulnerabilities that are going to pop up. The rise of cryptocurrency and foreign governments helping hackers. I mean, the reality is that you can't commit crimes with the United States dollar as easily as you can with Bitcoin. If I'm trying to rob a bank and I take all the cash out and I want to put it into another bank, the IRS will catch on to that. Cryptocurrency right now lacks the regulatory tooth, if you will, or bite, if you will, to track all these transactions, which is why it's so appealing when there's a ransomware attack for hackers to request Bitcoin, because they know it's not easy to catch them. Not only that, I mean, if you have a hostile government to the United States that doesn't necessarily care if Colonial Pipeline has a ransomware attack, and they in fact either encourage it or or create the environment for them to operate, that's a bad thing, and we can't do a whole lot about it. We can put pressure on politicians to do things about it, but you can't help what goes on in Russia. So, you know, we just have to know it exists, unfortunately, and react to it. Another thing that we have less control of, not complete lack of control, which I'll get into later, is a shortage of cybersecurity talent and resources. So in the SMB space, for example, you know, let's say you have an office with like 15 people. I mean, how many resources are you going to have to actually fight off these threats? Not that many. It's not like you're going to hire security engineers. You're not going to be able to buy every product off the shelf or get every last service in place. Even if you had a desire to, it's extremely hard to find people who have the knowledge and skills to fight off threats and do these things. The industry is short people. Pardon me. So I think part of the way to address that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is you know, first of all, limit your threat footprint so that you don't need the resources necessarily that might be required in an enterprise where they have to look for those rare talents and resources. So let's talk about a few steps you can take to reduce risk of account compromise. So the first and the number one thing, and everybody should do it, it's a full-throated endorsement. I'm going to keep talking about it. You're probably getting sick of me talking about it if you attend any of my other webinars or read my content, is deploying multi-factor authentication wherever possible, especially if you care about what is behind the login. You know, if the website you're logging into is, you know, maybe an online game that has no personal identifiable information or credit card information or whatever, you know, I'm not going to chew you out if you don't have, you know, the most sophisticated authentication system into that. I mean, the asset behind the login isn't that valuable, but certainly your email, your banking information, your tax information, healthcare information, anything of sensitivity that you really want to protect should be behind multi-factor authentication wherever possible. It shouldn't be that somebody can go on the web with any device on the planet, go to that website or destination and use a username and password only to get into something of value. If it's, you know, you can make the decision about what's valuable for yourself, but if you care about this stuff, you need to have multi-factor authentication in place. And if you're concerned, you're not sure where you can deploy it, that's where a technology expert can help you, like DP Solutions. Know where your data is and make sure those accounts have the most security. So think about ransomware attacks or phishing attacks or something like that. One thing that's a real challenge sometimes for organizations is knowing the scope of the impact of the attack. So imagine if you had, just for a simple solution and just a simple scenario, if you will, you had 5 servers, and those 5 servers all had operations that are important to your business, but you didn't know where the really sensitive information was. Maybe different people put their information in on different servers or in different ways. Let's say 2 of those servers are compromised. How are we really to know what data was stolen or what wasn't? How are we to know what kind of security we need on those servers when we really don't know what's on them because we don't manage them properly from a behavioral perspective? We need to have some personal responsibility and say, okay, these are the pieces of data that we as an organization care about. This is where this data must exist. Our people must put this information in these specific places so that we can build security around it and also know what's going to happen and be able to respond to cyber attacks in an agile way. I hope that makes sense. Avoid websites that don't have a good reputation for security. You know, feel free to go to LinkedIn, Amazon, eBay, you know, CNN, New York Times, whatever, any of these normal day-to-day websites that have a standard reputation. Feel free to use those. But, you know, let's say, especially as we approach the holidays and you see some great shopping deal and you've never heard of the store before and they've got a weird, you know, janky website that doesn't look all that great. You don't know anybody who's gone to the store. Maybe you saw it, it was a Facebook ad or something like that for some tchotchke that you really want. Those sites can be kind of sketchy when it comes to giving personal information. Say it's your information, credit card information, or you have to establish a username and password, which then could theoretically be compromised and used against you later. Probably best just to not use these websites. When in doubt, like with anything else, the best thing to do is to just not take any action. Use supportable and updated devices. If you don't know the status of your device's updates, if you're not confident that it's getting updates, that it's supportable from the manufacturer, you shouldn't be using it for any kind of sensitive work period. It shouldn't be connected to the internet. You're really, it's almost like getting back to the whole swimming with the sharks analogy. It's almost like being in the ocean and having blood dripping from you that the shark can get the scent on. When you have those vulnerabilities, now the sharks can get that scent and maybe attack off of it. Build security in the decision-making process. This is really critical. We don't want to be in a situation where we're making security decisions 1 year after a major change has occurred. Perhaps we can't do everything with security that we might want to do due to resources or technical challenges or what have you. But the security discussion, or at least knowing what our risks are, have to be understood as decisions are being made so that we know what our risk profile is and we can make other decisions based on it. Again, a lot of people just don't do this. They think about the shiny, the awesome stuff about technology, but they don't think about the risky stuff when making a change. So here's some other steps you can take. Encourage young people to get involved in cybersecurity. I'm sure if you're on this call, maybe there's a kid in your family who doesn't know what they want to do. Maybe they like computers. Maybe they just have no idea where they want to engage in. I think it'd be really great if we got more young people interested in the cybersecurity field. Speaking of blogs, I wrote another blog about careers in cybersecurity. One nice thing about the field is that there's a low bar to access. You don't need to, you don't have to be like a doctor, a lawyer, and spend years and years and years and years in college. You can get into programs and certifications that get you the knowledge you need to get in the field quickly. You can get into different kind of disciplines too. Like, for example, obviously I'm involved in cybersecurity to some extent, but I'm not a security engineer. I do a lot of training and phishing tests and stuff like that. There's a lot of ways where we could get more contributions from Americans, and not only that, give people a nice steady career that they can grow with and build a family with. So I really think people should consider that stuff more and offer it to kids as an opportunity. Make sure your organization has an assessment and review process. So, I'm in the middle of assessment right now where we're testing vulnerabilities, and among those things, we're looking at, for example, the ways people connect to their accounts and where MFA is put in and what the password policy is, so on and so forth. And if we're not taking a time every so often, and it's going to be different for everybody, but let's say we're doing it annually and we're assessing our system and going through and figuring out where things could be improved, where things could change, how the standards have changed, et cetera, we'd all be in a much better place. I mention MFA all the time, but maybe 3-4 years ago, MFA wasn't quite as standard of a solution for these things. It was more about just password management. And so if we're not doing these assessments to sort of see where does our technology stack as it compared to a few years ago, and how well are we addressing the risks that exist now as opposed to when we made our original decisions, we're kind of leaving some holes on our system that can be exploited. Limit your data footprint whenever possible. One way to prevent accounts from being hacked is by limiting the amount of our exposure, limiting our footprint, if you will. Every time we open a bank account, a credit card account, a social media account, an email account, Instagram, an alternate Facebook, Amazon, whatever, we're creating more records of ours. We're creating another account that we have to secure, that we may have to put MFA on. We may even forget about that account, that it exists in the first place, and now it's sort of an orphaned account sitting out there. It seems like we're very willing in general to offer information and establish accounts and things like that. And by all means, do so. Let's get the use out of our technology that we want. But we shouldn't be unscrupulous, or not unscrupulous. We shouldn't be, careless about it, and just negligent and just doing whatever we want. We should have some limitations. Adopt a security awareness training program for your staff. Every organization that has data and accounts that they care about has to have some kind of engagement with their staff about what cybersecurity risk is, how it impacts their organization, things that they should look out for, what phishing is, so on and so forth. When I do security awareness training for clients, I either do these lectures or we'll do online modules, and I'm keeping the scope simple and basic. We're not trying. It's not a university. It's not an 8-week program or something like that. It's just a little bit of touch here and there to give people the knowledge, the basic knowledge they need to respond to the threats that they're going to see every day. And so that they communicate properly, they handle things properly, and most importantly, that they avoid making those bad clicks that could potentially lead to disaster. There has to be some conversation with your staff, especially before you give them the keys to the car and let them start, messing around with your technology and your data. If you're giving people this access first and then training them later, we can't expect them to take the right steps. A few more things, technical tools that significant limit risk. I talked about MFA already. It needs to be on any account you're concerned with. Password managers are really nice to have too. If you've got, let's say you've got 20 accounts. I mean, you very well might have 20 accounts that you want to log into, and you want to have good, strong passwords. A LastPass can be which is a password manager. LastPass can be very helpful when it comes to making sure that you're consistently using strong passwords, that those logins are managed properly, that you're able to make changes easily and without confusion, etc. They can be used. You don't have to use it, but you have to do the things that a password manager does. Mobile device management tools. So if you're an organization and you have staff that uses not only maybe company provided devices, but also maybe a personal laptop or an iPhone or iPad or something like that, it's important that we have some kind of management on these so-called bring your own devices that are personally owned and supplied. We can't just leave it to staff on their own to say, yeah, I'm really secure in these things. We have to have some kind of tool in place to make sure it gets the patches, updates, that has security policies on it, so the phone can't just be instantly unlocked and anyone has any access to data whenever they want. That we can do remote wipes on devices of only the company information in the event that somebody is terminated. We need to have mobile device management in place. I know there's a lot of people ask me all the time, so-and-so doesn't want to have something on their personal phone. Well, then so-and-so doesn't need to have the company information on their phone. There can't be the individual's interests to be insecure cannot trump the organization's need to protect their data. There has to be a give and take, and I'm happy to talk about that further offline. Patch management tools, especially for browsers. So obviously we want to patch Microsoft Windows, Adobe, all of these various things all the time. But one area where we want to make sure patches are also applied is within web browsers, since most of the time when we're logging into something, that's where we're putting our information into. Google Chrome, which I use all the time, gets updates all the time. So does Microsoft Edge, so does Opera or whatever other browser you want to use. But it's important that the browser we use is up to date, and so that it's using the proper encryption protocols, that it's fully updated, that any exploits are taken care of. So make sure those things are up to date. And if you're not sure if you're keeping them up to date, check with your IT people. Last, and this is a little bit higher end, is like managed detection and response. So let's say we're doing all these things to keep things secure, but we want to know the second somebody unauthorized gets into our account, that we want to have, the security camera, so to speak, that when somebody smashes the glass on our window, that we see them doing it and we're able to respond immediately. There are higher end security solutions that can do this and actually watch the network and look for suspicious activity so that it can respond quickly to it. It's kind of hard when you consider all of the various things that happen on a PC using standard monitoring tools to know when something's been compromised. But when you have the digital eyeballs on it, so to speak, it's a lot easier to have a more positive response, or at least minimize damage from it. So anyway, wrapping up just real quick, we live in an online world that we both rely on critically, yet is also filled with constant threats. I mean, the reason this stuff exists in the first place. And the reason these accounts are compromised so much is that we're so leveraged in technology. You know, if we didn't care about this stuff, these threats wouldn't exist. The crimes follow the value. Just like, you know, if you put you know, $10,000 in cash on a you know, on a picnic table in a park, that money would be gone really quick. The bad guys go to where the money's at, and the money right now is online. Our accounts are always under attack. So I mean, you know, you probably feel the pain when all of a sudden you've been the victim of identity theft, or you know, experienced a phishing attack or something like that. But don't think that just because you haven't experienced a personal pain, that someone hasn't tried to take advantage of your environment, your accounts, or something like that. I've gotten weird notifications that someone attempted to log into my account, but because my MFA was in place, they weren't able to get in. That's kind of reassuring, but it's also kind of scary that I'm a target, you're a target, everybody's a target all the time. The threats are probably going to always exist and must be managed. You can't eliminate the risk. I mean, it's kind of you know, maybe if you want to think of it like acceptance, if you will, or like in Buddhism, like the idea of of Buddhism, that this always will happen. It's kind of a peaceful thing, which is to say, the idea that we're just going to shake this off and eliminate it, or that the hackers are just going to go away, it's not going to happen. It's more about how we manage this threat. It's better to look at it from like a personal health situation. We've gotten very good healthcare to treat things like cancer or heart disease or COVID-19 or whatever. But it doesn't mean that we've eradicated these diseases. It doesn't mean that cancer is gone. What we do is we manage these threats, and technology is kind of like that. You're far less likely to be hacked when you're using a combination of defenses. So these are the four big ones, which is multi-factor authentication, you know, protecting the logins, training your people to make sure they know what they're doing, having good policy. You know, I didn't put patch management. Patch management's included in there too, and revisiting your approach to make sure it's still effective. Reassessing your solution and making sure that you're making adjustments to tighten up your security. If you're doing all those things, it's not to say that your accounts won't be hacked, but those chances are just far less likely. And I've seen this from clients that we have right now to, you know, I've been in the industry, I guess, 16 years now. And inevitably, if the organizations that don't make the investments, that are a little bit more careless, that are a little slow to catch up with, you know, basic standards and practices, those organizations are the ones that get hit first with ransomware, account abuse, identity theft, etc. And the people who are doing those more sophisticated things, you just hear about it a lot less, or they have better outcomes where something happened and they were able to respond to it very quickly and minimize the damage. Anyway, that's it for the planned content. While we're getting questions, you know, my contact information is on the screen. You can reach out to me by email if you like. I'm also on LinkedIn, where we share a lot of stuff as well. You can feel free to ping me on there. And I will talk real briefly about our webinar in December. So we're going to be joined by our friends at Edwards Performance Solutions, and we're going to talk about cybersecurity assessments. So sort of the last thing I talked about, it's sort of the key to understanding and limiting risk. So Edwards is really great. They do a number of assessments. A lot of times it's based on compliance. So you know, if you're in the Mid-Atlantic region like we are, there's a number of things such as CMMC, HIPAA, PCI, etc. We're going to talk a little bit about that, how you approach assessments, the benefits, good management of it, etc. And so we invite you all to join us. The landing page is up. It's going to be Wednesday, December 15th at 11 a.m. We're doing it a little early, just like we're doing this one a little early, because we don't want to bump up with the holidays. I'm sure on the 22nd, you'd rather be doing other things with your families maybe than listen to me. So anyway, that's it. Jill, what questions do we have?
Yes, thanks, Ben. All right, our first question is, if I'm using a website that doesn't offer MFA, should I keep using that site?
It all depends on what you're doing on the site. So if the site is, if your exposure from that site is limited, then I wouldn't stress it, right? You know, I have websites that I use that I have a username and password on, but the information behind it is so minimal that I didn't worry about MFA on it. You know, just like I'm not personally impacted all that much by it being compromised. And so I'm not going to sweat it. However, if it was a bank, if it was my tax website, if I was pulling health information from it, maybe, anything of sensitivity, I would really try to see what I could do about getting MFA in place. You may have to make some compromises. It may not always work out the way you would do ideally for security, but we want to exercise the options available to us whenever possible. And for whoever asked the question, if you'd like to reach out directly to me to talk about a specific scenario and what my opinions are, I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay, great. Let's see. Next question is, my staff has been resistant to implementing security controls on their personal devices. What should I tell them?
So it's almost like I predicted the question, because I hear it so much. Look, they're resistant. They have to have security controls on their devices. I can understand if they don't want you to know on their personal device, for example, every website they go to. You as an employer are not entitled to knowing the web history or of everything they do on a personal device. You're not entitled to know what's in their personal emails or what files they have on their PC or pictures or something like that. You're not entitled to that information. However, a lot of the security tools I'm talking about, like mobile device management, patch management, etc., these are not personally intrusive things. These are things that are enforcing security protocols. It's saying, well, if you want to use this computer, you have to have a password in place. If you want to use this device, you have to have the device patched and such. And if their objection is that you're forcing them to patch their devices, well, to me, that's not a legitimate concern. And so I wouldn't allow it. They can use a company issued device where you can do, you can really restrict things and lock it down, then they have no choice of what is done on it. But if they want to use their personal device, that they have to agree to a certain level of security on it. It's as simple as that. And I know this is a big problem for some people. It's a real challenge. They don't want to upset their staff members. But, which would you rather have? Would you rather have a staff member who's a little ticked off that you made them do patches on their device? Or would you rather have a ransomware incident where you're talking to an attorney or a insurance company about whether you should be paying the ransom to a bad guy or whether you need to tell the 10,000 clients you have that you've lost their information? I mean, to me, it's not even a thought. You have to lean into the security side. So anyway, those are my opinions on it. I obviously take a very aggressive view of it, but the reality is that we can't allow personal biases and illegitimate worries about things to stop us from doing the basic security that everybody needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Ben. We do have one more question. It's, how often should I be reviewing my organization's security?
At least once a year. I mean, we have clients where we do QBRs, quarterly business reviews, where we're going over a number of things. I wouldn't call it that's not like a full-blown assessment type thing, but we are reviewing, sort of here's where we're at and here's some things we think you should do over the next, 6 to 12 months or whatever. And that stuff's good, but I think like a more comprehensive assessment annually is a good thing, where we say, okay, well, what do we have in place? What are our risks as an organization? Have we addressed those risks? Maybe depending on what you're doing, you may include some kind of vulnerability testing or configuration audit or something like that. And again, it's going to vary based on organization, but there needs to be some kind of review to say, yep, we're still on top of things, or no, we need to make a couple of changes, and this is how we're going to plan we're at the end of 2021. This is how we're going to plan in 2022 to address our risks, or at least acknowledge them and know that these risks exist, and this is the level of risk we're comfortable with. So I hope that helps. Annually is generally a good way to go. Some compliance standards will say more, some will say less, but if you're doing it annually, you're probably in a pretty good place.
Okay. All right, we did have another question come in. If field employees are using mobile devices, does it affect the home-based network it's connected to?
Probably not. I mean, if I'm in the answer is really what is at the home base, right? Let's say, for the sake of argument, I have a file server sitting in a central office, and my people are accessing files on that server all day. And they're doing it from the office, from their home, and also from these mobile devices that you described from a job site or whatever. I could be using resources on that server or my internet connection, for example, to download stuff. So if I have, let's say, a 100 megabit internet connection at my main office, and now I've got 50 people coming from the outside to download information from a server, I'm going to be chewing up a little bit about that bandwidth. Now, does it matter? Maybe, maybe not. It kind of depends on what you're doing. But it could matter. And you know, these things it's just sort of like a cup of water. You can only put so much water in before it starts overflowing. You know, you can only pull so much bandwidth before maybe you start noticing things. One of the benefits of using cloud-based or software as a service-based solutions is that those concerns about bandwidth or resource utilization, et cetera, are a little bit easier to manage when you say to Microsoft, hey, Microsoft, we're going to use your cloud-based email system instead of having an in-house email system of our own, because then I don't have to worry about how fast my internet connection is or how many people are pinging my local server at the same time. I'm using their thing, and that's Microsoft's problem. They have to figure it out, or Google's problem. They have to figure it out. But generally, no. I mean, these days, the bandwidth needs just to pull basic data is pretty small. The things that chew up the most are things like if you were transferring video or large files across long distances, or you had a database server locally that everybody's hammering all the time, this thing that people are constantly using, and maybe it's a little older, it's got too many people on it or not enough resources. That's when you tend to notice these problems. Once again, like any of these other things, if you have a specific concern in your environment, we can take it offline and talk about how, you know, your specific scenario, I guess.
All right, and then a follow-up question, does it also affect security?
It could. I mean, you know, again, if you think about it, you know, whenever we're working on the web and we're talking to an asset that is located in a different location, we're using the public web. You know, we're here in Maryland, so it's like we're using 95 or 695 to transmit information to someone else, right? And everybody's driving on 695 and 95. It's a public street, just like the internet's a public place. You know, anybody can use it. And so who's doing things on the web and who's reading the stuff that you're transmitting? Are we using encryption to make sure that the data we transmit from one location to the other, whether it's a job site or our office or our cloud location or wherever, are we using the proper encryption tools to make sure that when we're using public communication standards that the information can't be read? You know, there can be an impact. This gets also into the concept I brought up before of planning security into design. So, you know, how are people using these devices? What are the security concerns of these people using devices, and how can we address it? But to be real, I mean, millions of people use mobile devices. This is how everybody works these days. So it definitely can be done, and it can be done in a reasonably secure fashion. It's just a matter of making that design upfront and maintaining it.
Okay, I think that's the end of our questions.
Wow, we got a lot of them today. All right, great. Well, thank you everybody so much for attending. I hope you found this information helpful. Please join us in December for our webinar. If you need to reach out to me for any reason at all, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. And I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving and a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.